So yes, as I've said, my name's Ella. I'm an author, I'm a journalist, and I'm an amputee. And I'm here to talk to you today about resilience, about kind of how I coped in the hardest of times and the things that helped me. And I think that's something that, regardless of what you've been through or are going through, we've all been tested a lot over the past year and a bit. And so hopefully this will resonate. And again, I'm very willing to answer any questions in the chat at any point. So we'll answer them at the end if you just drop them in there whenever you want as we go along. So there I am. That's me. That photo was taken 5 years ago on the day before my life changed forever. So that was me in Victoria Park in East London, near where I live, walking with my mum. I'd had a really lovely day. It was a May bank holiday weekend. That was the bank holiday Saturday. So my mum had come to visit me and my sister, who I live with. We'd had a really, really nice day wandering around, being tourists, as you can see in the Olympic Park in Stratford. I was 25 at the time. I was and still am a journalist working for women's magazines. I was working for Good Housekeeping magazine, and I just started that job, so it was all very exciting. Hectic social life, like out most nights, really just kind of living life to the full, like active, swimming, running, all sorts. And then the next day, after this lovely day that I'd had another busy day planned. So I was planning, I went on a run with my sister in the morning, and then I was planning to do like a charity thing, hosting an afternoon tea for elderly people in my community in the afternoon. I had a first date planned that night. Unfortunately, my life changed forever when I went on that run. So I woke up on the Sunday morning. My sister was training for a 10K, so we decided to go for a run together. And we only went out for sort of 20 minutes. We didn't take our phones with us. We just sort of took our front door key, and off we went. And unfortunately, on the way back, about 5 minutes away from my flat, running along a canal path, I tripped and fell. I knew immediately that this wasn't any normal fall. I knew that I was in severe pain. I knew I couldn't stand up. I'd never broken a bone before, apart from my little finger when I shut it in a door at university. So I had nothing really to compare the pain to. So I kind of just assumed that I'd broken my leg. I knew I needed an ambulance. But of course, we didn't have our phones with us. So we had to wait for somebody to come along this deserted canal path to call an ambulance. And a man did come along, and he phoned the ambulance for us, but then he hung up and he said he had to go because he had a train to catch, and left us there. So it was really quite scary, just sort of being left there. I was, shouting to my sister to go and get help, and of course she didn't want to leave me. We waited for a bit longer. I can't say how much longer really, because trauma does such funny things to the brain. It blocks certain things out. And eventually another girl came along, and she phoned the ambulance, and she stayed with us, and she waited on the main road and showed the ambulance where we were. And I was taken to the Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel. A little trigger warning now, because I'm about to show you an X-ray. So if you don't like that sort of thing, don't look. There's also a couple of other slides afterwards of me in hospital. Nothing super gory, but just a little trigger warning there in case that sort of thing you're sensitive to. So I was taken to the Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel, and it was immediately clear that this wasn't just a normal break. I had broken my tibial plateau in my knee, but also I'd had a dislocation of my knee. And the combination of those injuries meant that the blood couldn't get through to my foot. So basically I was rushed straight into theatre. This is where it all gets slightly hazy, because obviously I was given so many drugs at this point that it's kind of hard to remember and pinpoint moments. But I was taken into surgery straight away, and I was there for about 12 hours. And then I was in intensive care for the next few days, having a few different operations to try and restart the circulation to my right foot. So I had 3 operations, and unfortunately, after the third one, they said, I'm really sorry, there's nothing more we can do. The pulse in your foot is there, but it's very, very weak, and you're at risk of developing sepsis. So I really remember being told, after being told that amputation was the only remaining option, signing the consent forms and looking down at my leg and thinking, I painted my toenails. So bizarre. Painted my toenails because I was going on a first date. And it really just shows that in one moment, in one single moment, life can just change beyond all recognition. And you never know what's round the corner. Or at least I had no idea that this was round the corner. So at the age of 25, I became an amputee. There's another photo coming up, which of me in hospital. So just as a warning. So that was me after surgery. Obviously, my leg was very, very swollen for a long time, and it took a little while for that to go down. But I couldn't get a prosthetic leg straight away because I had this break in my knee. So my leg was amputated below the knee, and the surgeons thought they could save my knee, which they did, I'm really pleased to say. But it meant 4 months of having that knee held straight so that the bones could heal. So I had 4 months in a wheelchair, and I went back to my parents' house in Kent during this time to be looked after. And it really did give me a whole new perspective at that point. I'd not really thought about accessibility much before. That's awful, but I think unless you know somebody in that situation, a lot of people don't think about it. Even things like curbs that weren't dropped, I couldn't get down them in my wheelchair, or the London Tube being incredibly inaccessible, so many steps and things. And it really did give me a whole new perspective. People look at you differently when you're in a wheelchair. It's a very bizarre but true fact. People were looking literally down on me, but also in terms of their attitude sometimes as well. And of course, this isn't everyone. I don't want to generalize here at all. But it really just started to give me a whole new perspective of kind of the world of disability. And it was what started my kind of trigger to want to campaign and kind of bring more awareness to disability and become a bit of an advocate for disability rights. So after being in the wheelchair for 4 months, I went to an amputee rehabilitation centre where I learned to walk again. And I was there at this inpatient unit for amputees for 6 weeks. And I had intensive physiotherapy every day. I had occupational therapy. This is me using an early walking aid called a PAM aid, which they inflate around the leg. And you use it with crutches or in a parallel bar like I'm doing on the left there. And it's the first step in learning to walk again. And after that, when you've kind of mastered that, you then get cast for a prosthetic leg. This is me being cast for my first ever prosthetic leg. Very exciting. You can see by the smile on my face how excited I am to be the prospect of walking again. And they use plaster of Paris, just like if you break your arm or whatever. That's how they build the cast that then eventually goes on to become a prosthetic leg. So it's very clever. So I eventually managed to learn to walk again after a lot of hard work. It probably took a good few months until I wasn't using any form of crutches or walking stick with my prosthetic leg. But as I mentioned, I knew I wanted to give back. So I decided to get involved in national charity, the Limbless Association, lending them my skills as a journalist to write for their quarterly magazine, Step Forward, and more recently leading on their Young Ambassador project, which is a podcast. So we've done one series of the podcast. I'm recording the second series at the moment. Actually, I've got one this evening, a recording. So that's been going on, and it's just so wonderful to be able to give back and to provide peer support, because that's the thing. I had never really met an amputee before. I'd seen the Paralympics. Apart from that, it was kind of so beyond my realm of experience. And actually, it was meeting other amputees, both in hospital and at the amputee rehabilitation centre. That was the first thing that really showed me that there was life after limb loss. And it really taught me a lot about resilience and about the power of overcoming challenges. So I really wanted to get involved with the charity, and it's something that's really close to my heart. Of course, as Liv mentioned, my book, Five Steps to Happy, is out now, and that came out in 2019. The idea of it is a girl that has the exact same accident as I did. She trips over on a flat path, but then beyond that, it's fictional. And like many journalists, I'd always wanted to write a book. And it just shows you that out of the darkest of times, and out of the hardest of moments, there are always silver linings. There's always light to be found, however kind of trite that sounds. I really am a firm believer in finding the hope and finding the community. And it's so amazing to hear people who've read my book, no matter what they've gone through. It might not be amputation, it might be grief, or mental health problems, or whatever they're going through, to contact me and say that my book has given them a little slice of joy has been a really, really amazing thing. I've also now got a running blade. So I've been building myself up over lockdown. I can now do a 5K, although I say that I haven't done it for a few weeks. So whether I'll still be able to do a 5K when I put my blade back on, I'm not sure. But it's all about challenging myself. And I think that there's a real, a sort of mantra for life there, that challenge is something that can really, really help. And sort of challenge equals change sometimes, I think. When we're sort of stuck in a rut, setting ourselves a goal is so, so important. Whatever that goal may be, it could be something really small. Like for me at the very beginning, it was going up escalators, or, learning to use stairs without crutches. It could be things like that if you're going through trauma, or just things like, I'm going to be kinder to myself. I'm going to write something in a journal every day. I'm going to do gratitude exercises. There are so many ways in which we can set these goals, and then we can bring change upon ourselves, bring positive change upon ourselves. So I definitely have a new mindset. As I've been mentioning, it's something that I had to grow up very quickly. I'm 30 now. I feel a lot older than that. I feel like I've lived a lot of life in the past 5 years, and it's definitely kind of taught me a lot, both kind of about society and disability, but also about myself. I really feel so much more secure in myself than I did 5 years ago. And again, that's part of going through this journey. And it took me a really long time, actually, to think whether I wanted therapy or not, because the first year after the accident, I was so focused on my physical recovery that I didn't really think about the mental recovery much. I kind of just was really focused on doing the next physical milestone, getting a running blade or whatever that might be. And about a year in, I sort of realized I was having these flashbacks of the accident. So I would get into bed at night, and just before I fell asleep, I would see my accident on repeat, sort of as if I was watching a film of it that I couldn't pause or I couldn't stop. So I would just see it in front of my eyes. I'd see myself back on that canal path. I would see myself tripping. I'd see myself falling. I would feel the pain again. And it was really, really bizarre. And this was in that strange state that we go into between being awake and being asleep. It was literally just before I fell asleep, almost every night. And it got to a point where I started thinking, this doesn't have to be like this. To begin with, I was thinking, okay, well, this must be normal for people that have gone through difficult times. It's just part of the healing process, and it will stop. But when it didn't, and when I kind of realized that there were all these pent up emotions that I hadn't really explored because I'd been basically distracting myself with physical milestones, I then got in touch with my prosthetic centre. They have an on-site, as many prosthetic centres do, they have an on-site therapist. And I rang her up and I said, I think I'm struggling. And she said, I knew you'd come back. Because a year before I'd had a multidisciplinary meeting where you have the doctor there, the nurses there, the psychotherapist there, the prosthetist, everyone that is going to treat you. And she had approached me, and I'd said to her, I'm not the sort of person that needs therapy. And that actually was probably quite rude for a start, but also that just shows you the headspace I was in. I was not focusing on my mental well-being at all. And I had this real stigma about therapy, oh no, I'm not that person. I don't need therapy. And of course, that's absolutely ridiculous. I really feel like now, having been through the other side, therapy is something that it shouldn't be a shameful thing. No one should be ashamed of it. Actually, it's such a useful tool, invaluable tool, in fact. And I really firmly believe that everyone, no matter who you're, like what you're going through, even if you haven't experienced a trauma, even if you haven't experienced sort of a mental health battle, even if you haven't experienced bereavement, anyone would benefit from therapy, and just that feeling of understanding yourself better. It's about becoming more in tune with yourself and who you are as a person. And I learned that the hard way, because it wasn't until I had this trigger, this push from all these horrible PTSD symptoms. I was saying to her, oh, I think I've got a little bit of PTSD. And she said, you can't have a little bit of PTSD, Ella, you have PTSD. And it kind of dawned on me, oh yes, I like, why am I letting pride get in the way of my mental recovery? And so I went through therapy, mostly acceptance commitment therapy, ACT, which is kind of a sister of CBT. And it's all about values, it's all value based. So it's all to do with working out what your values are, and then sort of applying them to your life. And your values can change over time. What you value now might not be what you value in 5 years' time. And it's really, really interesting when you then do it with other people and you can work out what their values are. And perhaps if you don't get on with someone, it's not because you fundamentally don't like them necessarily. It could just be a clash in your values. So I've learned so much about that. And I feel like I'm a much sort of more well-rounded person. And that really helped cultivate resilience as well. It really, really did. The other thing that helped cultivate resilience was learning about writing for well-being, which is something I'm doing more and more of now. Journaling is a buzzword that we use a lot. However, it is really, really beneficial. Carving out that little bit of space to just sit and write, even if you're not a writer. I teach these workshops and I think actually it's better sometimes if you're not a writer, because I second guess myself all the time. I'm a perfectionist. Anything I write down, I think, oh, could I phrase that better? But it's not really about that. It's about just sitting somewhere quiet, somewhere where you feel comfortable, and just getting words out on the page, setting a timer for 10 minutes, just writing, seeing what comes out. And that has been a real tool for me when it comes to my mental health and harnessing resilience. So it's something I'd really, really recommend. And I can't leave this slide without explaining why I'm abseiling down the side of a building. So it felt like a kind of pinnacle in my recovery, really. It was my 5-year anniversary since my accident in May. And my sister and I decided we wanted to do something to kind of not necessarily celebrate, but I suppose commemorate. So on the actual day, we ran down the path, the canal path where I fell. We went for a run down there, me on my blade, which was quite scary, but also ultimately very liberating. And then recently, a couple of weeks ago, actually, I did a charity abseil down the Royal London Hospital, the hospital I was treated at, for the London's Air Ambulance. Now, thankfully, I didn't need the air ambulance, but they are obviously an incredible, incredible organisation who save lives every day. And they're a charity, so they need that money. And it was just amazing. We were abseiling down the hospital. When we got to the 12th floor, it's I think 17 floor building. When we got to the 12th floor, or what I assumed was the 12th floor, I saw a man in hospital in the ward as I abseiled down. So he was by the window, a bed by the window, and he waved at me and I waved back at him. And I just thought, wow, this is just a real pinnacle of how far I've come. And when you're in that building, when you're in that hospital bed, you don't think that your life is ever going to get better, really. You think like you're in a hole, you're in a deep black hole, and it's really hard to dig yourself out of that hole. But then actually on the exterior of the hospital, although there was struggle, although there were difficult times, although sometimes I felt kind of alienated being in the outside world as opposed to the safety of the hospital, there was hope and there was possibility and there was opportunity. So that's something that I think can be applied to every situation. And that's why I wanted to put this picture up. So thank you so much for listening to me today. Thank you for joining the session.